and orientation about various gastrointestinal things and hepatic disorders and nutritional disorders among pediatricians, common care physicians, as well as patients and attendants through CME, through symposia, seminars, camps, and other activities. This year from January, we started monthly theme-based CME, and today is the fourth monthly theme-based CME of Feed Gastro Rajasthan. And we have discussed celiac disease in the first CME, and then constipation, then acute hepatitis. And today we have a living legend of pediatric gastroenterology with us, Dr. S.K. Yacha Saab, Surendra Kumar Yacha Saab, who needs no introduction. Everyone in the Rajasthan and India knows him, but still I would state few things about him. He is the person who started pediatric gastroenterology department in India, first pediatric gastroenterology department in SGPGI Lucknow, and he has trained more than 50 trainees, either 1 year or 2 year or DM candidates from there, and they are working all over India. Not only in India, they are working abroad also with the very good positions. And due to his tireless efforts, DM Pediatric Gastroenterology was started at SGPGI Lucknow, and he has more than 100 publications in journals of national and international repute. I personally always try to never miss his talks in any national or international or pediatric gastroenterology or general pediatrics conferences, as his every session is a learning for me, and not only for me, it is for all the persons. His very important thing is zeal to teach in very simple words. This is unparalleled. I have never listened to any person who teaches in such simple words. So presently he is director, pediatrics and pediatric super specialties and HOD pediatric gastroenterology, hepatology and liver transplant at Chakra Ward Hospital, Bangalore. So I welcome you, sir, and I am highly thankful that you have spared time for our audiences and for us. We have eminent moderator with us, Dr. C.B. Das Gupta sir, who is a senior pediatrician and pediatric gastroenterologist situated at Kota. He has organized many national and state level pediatric gastroenterology meetings as well as IAP and IMA meetings. He is a thorough and great academician, and every pediatrician of Rajasthan have a deep respect for him. He has been pioneer in the breastfeeding as well as ORS in Rajasthan. So I welcome you, sir. And we have two panelists with us, Dr. Rakesh Joraji, who is senior professor, my friend, my colleague at Umeed Hospital, SN Medical College, Jodhpur. He is the head division of pediatric gastroenterology. He is very active in the IAP and he has been twice EB member, and at present also he is executive board member of the national IAP. I welcome Dr. Jora Saab. And second panelist is our own Dr. Lalit Varadia. You all know him well. He is a pediatric gastroenterologist at SDMH Hospital, a very sincere academician and a great speaker. He is secretary of the Pediatric Gastro Rajasthan. He is one of the pioneers of pediatric gastroenterology in Rajasthan. Welcome you all, and now I hand over the proceedings to Dr. C.B. Das Gupta. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. We are happy to be here with all the leading pediatric gastro people, and especially my friend Dr. Surendra Yacha, whom I know since 1997. One of the legends in the history of India, the pediatric gastro, a super specialty person. Now, I have also pleasured to listen to Dr. Saroj Mehta, the pioneer lady. I had listened to him, and the same greatness and with his grace, Dr. Surendra Yacha speaks about. We welcome you, sir, and another Dr. Rakesh Jora and Lalit Baradia. Good evening, everybody, viewers, everything. Now we start with our session on chronic pain abdomen, frequently asked questions, So it's a very common problem in pediatric practice in our OPD, and we have almost 10 to 15% of school-going children suffer from chronic pain abdomen, CAP. My daughter is 5-year-old and often complains of abdominal pain, and mother talks to a doctor. So, Dr. Saab, my child is having pain abdomen since last almost 1 year. So I asked Dr. Yacha, our senior person, that, sir, what do we mean by CAP/RAP? And what could be its simplified etiopathogenesis of CAP? So Dr. Yacha, sir.
Thank you, all the dignitaries there from Rajasthan. I'm very grateful to all of you for having invited me to this session. Because of the paucity of the time, I will straightway go to the question. That is chronic abdominal pain. It simplifies, it's an abdominal pain of chronic nature. Very importantly, we have to understand that abdominal pain can be because of the organic causes or non-organic causes. Today's session is on non-organic causes of chronic abdominal pain. And in that, we have got 4 areas. We have got abdominal pain, which may be actually in the upper abdomen, which is related to esophagus, stomach, duodenum, and upper part of the small bowel. And second part is the small bowel alone, where we have the periumbilical type of pain. And third area is what is called the colonic pain, which may be in the lower abdomen, like for instance, IBS, like syndrome. And fourth one, which is a very rare disorder that's called the abdominal migraine, which may be in the midline. So all these are non-organic and different sites in the abdomen. Now the question is whether we should use RAP. RAP is a recurrent abdominal pain. This was coined by Appelé. I will not go into the detail. And now it is used synonymous with the functional abdominal pain, which is periumbilical in site. Psychogenic, it is not psychogenic. We should not call chronic abdominal pain as psychogenic. Psychogenic, basically chronic abdominal pain or this functional abdominal pain is basically a biopsychosocial model. It's a biopsychosocial model, and psychology may be playing a part in that, but it's not basically a psychogenic etiology. Second thing is regarding the non-organic, we are talking about the non-organic pain. So this is about, what we are talking under umbrella of chronic abdominal pain would be number of disorders: upper abdomen, middle abdomen, lower abdomen, and abdominal migraine. And recurrent abdominal pain will be actually in the periumbilical region, which we are always seeing these such kind of cases. Now, second thing is simplify the etiopathogenesis of functional abdominal pain. Functional abdominal pain is referred to as RAP also. They are synonymous. Now here is a recent understanding on what we call the etiopathogenesis of functional abdominal pain. Here we have a hypersensitivity, visceral hypersensitivity in the GI tract, anywhere. Mostly it is in the small bowel. And that hypersensitivity may be because of many reasons, which we don't know exactly. It may be actually food items, infection, inflammation, permeability problems in the intestine, or it may be because of the microbiome. We know that there are bacteria in the small bowel, large bowel, and they may be altering the system or because of the motility problems. So that is actually somehow this hyperalgesia, which is the primary hyperalgesia, that is actually conveyed or transmitted through the afferent sensory nerve and goes to the arousal center here in the brain, deep in the brain. What is important to know, it is not only here in the visceral system, but also in the arousal center in the brain, there is actually amplification of pain. This pain, whatever signals are got, there's an amplification in the arousal centers, and this is transmitted further to the sensory cortex. With the result, basically, this pain is actually all in head. all in head. It is not actually viscera is the target, but actually it is the pain is in the head. And because of that concept, visceral hypersensitivity, the concept is that we have to target the therapy nowadays to the CNS, to CNS. Also, morphometry has shown that in such kind of patients, there is thickening of the sensory cortex. There is also thickening in the white matter. So it is actually not fully understood problem as to why it happens. But one thing is clear, that the pain is there visceral hypersensitivity, and the sensitization of the pain is because of the amplification. Now, that is brain gut dysfunction is there. It is gut brain dysfunction actually happening in this patient. But there are other stressors. They may aggravate. They are not the primary causes. They may aggravate, like environmental factors, psychological factors. That is why it is not a psychogenic pain. And then you may have what is called the environmental reinforcement, parental anxiety, that also aggravates the pain. These are secondary modeling pain prone. If the father has IBS, then the child also has got a precipitating event as a pain abdomen. So all these are the stressors which are well known in functional and abdominal pain. We'll discuss them as we go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Yacha. The things are very clear that the chronic abdominal pain and the RAP, they are synonyms, and most of the children causes are the chronic abdominal pain is of the functional in nature. Very well said, Dr. Saab. The cause is because of the stress-induced central nervous system and the spasmodic contraction of the intestine and many other things. So things are very clear. We just go ahead with the next question from Dr. Rakesh Jora, that out of myriad of causes of chronic abdominal pain, we enumerate the 5 topmost causes upon which a pediatrician should focus in OPD. It is a busy OPD. There are a lot more causes, upper intestine, lower part of the abdomen, and many other, as Dr. Yacha has already mentioned. So Dr. Jora, kindly enumerate 5 topmost causes which are responsible for chronic pain abdomen in children. Dr. Jora.
Thank you, sir. And dignitaries on the board, Honorable Dr. Yacha, sir, Dr. C.V. Gupta, Saab, Dr. R.K. Gupta, boss, Dr. Baradia, Dr. Natwar, and thanks for inviting me for this important talk. As Dr. Yacha has said, that one of the most important cause, that is a common cause for CAP, is the functional abdominal pain. There are numerous causes, there is an exhaustive list of causes of chronic abdominal pain. Most common can be the functional abdominal pain. Apart from this, there are many organic causes which are responsible for the chronic abdominal pain. They are the first is the constipation. There can be parasitic infections. There can be carbohydrate malabsorption. In cases of, it can be occurred due to the peptic disorders like that of reflux esophagitis, gastric ulcer, erosive gastritis. It can be due to the urinary tract infections, and nowadays the common causes can be due to the irritable bowel syndrome, or it can be due to inflammatory bowel disease. And nowadays H. pylori infection is not a cause of chronic abdominal pain, but due to H. pylori infection, there can be erosive gastritis and there can be reflux esophagitis, which can be lead to the causes of the chronic abdominal pain. So these are the, apart from this, in the adolescent female, dysmenorrhea can be a cause of chronic abdominal pain. So these are the main causes whenever in a BG OPD practice we should think of.
But can you enumerate by this, seriousness from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? There are almost, you have enumerated 10 or 12 causes.
First is the constipation. First is the constipation, parasitic infections, or we can have dysmenorrhea, peptic disorders like that of nowadays. It is reflux esophagitis or gastritis, you can say, or UTI and irritable bowel syndrome, and that is inflammatory bowel syndrome. They are the prominent. We cannot say that these top 5 causes are there. There are many causes, but mainly there are around, we can say around 100 causes are there for the chronic abdominal pain. But these, whenever the patient comes
Okay,
to,
thank you, Dr. Jora. You have mentioned that, first the important cause of chronic constipation is one of the important causes. Urinary tract infection is the important cause. Functional abdominal pain is there. And you have also met a worm infestation, which is very
Yeah.
much common, acid peptic disease. I think these 4 or 5, one should focus in OPD. Now we go to the next question from Dr. Lalit Bharadia. So what are the red flag symptoms in chronic abdominal pain? And
So-
they are very important, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So since the most common cause of chronic abdominal pain is functional abdominal pain, it is a lot more important to spend time in the history and examination so that we don't subject these children to unnecessary investigation. So the red flag symptoms which would make me bother that this could be possible organic pain would be a pain which is away from umbilicus. So any pain which is there in the flanks, in the back, in the groin, more likely to be organic. Any pain which disturbs sleep, any pain which has repeated vomiting, associated fever, any blood in the stool, or any weight loss, or if the nature has been chronic, there has been failure to thrive. All these symptoms would make me wonder whether this is likely to be some organic cause, and I will dwell more deeply into the examination to see if there are any red flag signs also. Based on this, I will plan my strategy.
Yeah. So red flag symptoms, they are very important for talking about the severity of the chronic abdominal pain, and hematochezia is one. You have mentioned that fever, loss of appetite, and vomiting sometime. Jaundice is also important. Yeah. Could it be?
Yeah. So one additional thing is that severity of pain is not necessarily equivalent to seriousness of the disease. Many times the parents would say that the child is so much in pain that he is into tears. But the child crying or tears in the child are not equated with the seriousness of the disease, because the response is all dependent upon the rearing of the child as to in which environment this child has been reared. So that should not be equated with the seriousness and should not be led to over investigation.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Dr. Lalit. Now we go to the Dr. Jora again. So, Dr. Saab, once we are talking about the red flag symptoms, what are the important red flag signs in chronic abdominal pain? So, what are the symptoms he has already talked about? You talk about
Yes.
the signs. Yeah.
the symptoms which are red flags in cases of chronic abdominal pain, that is whenever there is pain and tenderness in right upper and lower quadrant. Whenever there is a localized mass is there, we felt that is localized mass is palpable, it can be because of it is a red flag sign. Or there is organomegaly, that the patient is presenting with hepatosplenomegaly, or there is patient presented with a pallor or jaundice, or sometimes there is a spinal tenderness is there, if there is a costovertebral tenderness is there, or is there is a tenderness away from the umbilicus. That is that whenever there is tenderness away from the umbilicus, we should, apart from this, we should always examine the perineal areas. In the perineal area, there can be fistulas, fissures. They can be also indicating toward the red flag signs in cases of the chronic abdominal pain.
Thank you. Dr. Yacha, could you add something to these signs and symptoms which these
I think it adequately addressed. When we look at the abdominal distension is one, and visible peristalsis, organomegaly is already mentioned, all those pointers, which are very valid points. Organomegaly, and then we should also look at the perineal area, particularly in view of the IBD, which is increasing in India. We should look at that. So I think this is enough for as far as the signs are concerned.
Okay. So you are also including the abdominal distension, the visible peristalsis.
And visible peristalsis, that should be included.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Jora. And now we go about back to Dr. Lalit Bharadia. So, Dr. Saab, you talk about the Rome's criteria. Now, what is the Rome criteria we talk about in chronic pain abdomen? Can we talk about its rationality and validity?
Yeah, so Rome Foundation is basically a group of like-minded people who have devoted their life for the improvement in the quality of life of people suffering from functional GI disorder, because we know that functional GI disorder is highly common all over the world, and it is a cause of significant poor quality of life. And these people have sat together and have drafted criteria. They have been revised periodically. Now we have the Rome 4 criteria. Initially, the criteria were only for the adult, then came for the pediatric, and then in the third came for neonate and pediatric, and the last one has been further modified. It basically has divided the functional GI disorder into several subcategories, depending upon whether they are of the foregut origin, midgut origin, hindgut origin, whether they are mainly of the constipation type, whether they are of the diarrhea type. Basically, it helps us, the doctors, to classify the symptoms of children suffering from functional GI disorder into a giving a positive diagnosis of functional GI disorder and not subjecting them for unnecessary investigation. It does hold, it is quite rational, because unless we have something to guide us, our actions are going to be very arbitrary. In children, the diagnosis of functional GI disorder should not be based by exclusion. It should not be that I will do a set of investigation. If that is normal, then I will put a label of functional GI disorder, because that doesn't help in children. Because the more you subject them to a invasive procedure, traumatic test, then to reinforce that this is functional GI disorder becomes very difficult. In an adult, one may, do over investigation, but in a pediatric, we should try and follow this criteria, because this helps us a lot. It may be difficult for us to remember all these criteria, more so when they are changing every few years. So it is quite understandable. What is important is that among the functional GI disorders, the most common are functional abdominal pain, functional constipation. These criteria should be kept ready to refer, maybe on the table behind the glass, what we use, so that whenever a child comes with chronic abdominal pain, when a child comes with chronic constipation, we can use this criteria. And if the child fulfills this criteria, we can give them a positive diagnosis. It should not be, gone are the days where we tell them that this is not to worry, this is non-organic. This doesn't help. We have to tell them that what it is. So we have to tell them that this is functional abdominal pain. We have to tell them that this is functional constipation. It is a recognized entity. It is so common, we can give them prevalence, whether the 10% or 20% of the world population in this age group suffers from this. And once we give them a positive diagnosis, they are free to Google it out, look at it, find a support group, join the support group, and avoid unnecessary investigation and treatment. Once they know that so many people are suffering, they have a better prognosis in terms of longevity, and it can be transient if they are dealt with a multidisciplinary team. So this is where I find Rome criteria to be very useful. I don't know how far they are valid medico-legally, but yes, sure, once you have followed some criteria which have been thoroughly validated in the West, we don't have Indian data, but definitely they have been validated and they have been modified. One can use them as a tool to give a positive diagnosis.
Okay, Dr. Lalit, we'll try to be brief about the things because time is just going faster. So, a word from Dr. Yacha in today's perspective in India about the Rome's criteria. What do you would like to say, sir?
Rome's criteria is a very good, actually, a guideline for the practitioners, guideline for the researchers. They can quote it. So it is good for, especially they have given for the dyspepsia, they have given for the constipation, for the functional abdominal pain. So these criteria are very useful for irritable bowel syndrome also they have given. So they are very useful, they are a guide, but we can't remember all these criteria. We know that. I don't remember everything. I may have to refer. So it's a good guide. That's all. In India, we have not validated, and it is not also possible to validate everywhere this kind of criteria.
Yeah. In Indian perspective, we are not validated this. Yeah.
Even UK has not done. In many European countries, it's not possible to do it. Rome is doing a very good, actually, work for adults as well as pediatrics. So we should follow them.
Right. Okay, sir. We just go ahead with the Dr. Rakesh Jora. Dr. Saab, whether you would advise some tests in each case of functional abdominal pain, because many pediatricians I have seen after clinical examination, they say this does not need the investigation and this directly goes to the functional chronic abdominal pain. And if the mother is insisting, so what would be your minimum test? So first question is that, would you like to advise tests in each and every case? And if you say yes, what would be the minimum test? Right, Dr. Rakesh Jora.
First of all, if we do the history and physical examination, it shows the patient is suffering from a functional abdominal pain, then there is no investigations is required. But if to reassure the family, mother, as well as sometimes to reassure the doctor himself has reassured, if there is significant disturbance of the life, significant functional disability, poor quality of life, we can have some screening tests can be done like that. We can do the CBC, ESR, CRP, or we can do the stool for ON cyst, urine analysis, and we can do the TTG. These tests we can, or sometimes we can do some panel of the biochemistry panel like that of liver function test. It has been seen that the patients who are suffering from the chronic abdominal pain, they are 4 times risk of developing the serious disease as the normal. That's why we have included the TTG in. Otherwise, the routine investigation we can do. And if there is anything abnormal comes, then we go for the second line investigation, that they have to ultrasound abdomen, breath, hydrogen test, like these tests we can do.
So in chronic pain abdomen, ultrasound will be in the second level or the first level?
Second level, not the primary investigation, not the primary. Minimum test, it is not come in the category of minimum tests. It is in the second line investigation.
Yeah. Okay. So if you have the second, can we go for the level 2 pains? If the pain is, still the things are unsolved. So would you like to go for the second level?
Yeah, we can do the ultrasound upper abdomen to see the gallbladder, pancreas and kidneys, or we can do the pelvic ultrasounds, that is in case of females with some gynecology, for the gynecology problems. Is there any abnormalities can come, when we can do for the upper GI series of the investigations. And sometimes we
would you like to go for UI upper GI endoscopy in the second level?
It is, if it is the problem is still persisting and we are not getting any any abnormality we are seeing in the ultrasound or all these things, then we can go for the endoscopy, esophagogastroduodenoscopy we can do.
Yeah. Okay, fine. So second level test, we go for the upper GI endoscopy and the colonoscopy if needed. So, and for the third level test, if the things are still unsolved, Dr. Jora, are you going to do some extra tests for that?
Extra tests we can go for nowadays. That is the incidence of H. pylori is increasing in the pediatric age group. We can go for the H. pylori investigation, or we can go for the test for the carbohydrate malabsorption, like that of hydrogen breath test. These things we can do.
Okay. Thank you. We just go ahead. Friends, minimum test of the CBC, ESR, urine, the renal function test, the liver function test. And if needed, we can go for the ultrasound. And if even then, still the things are unsolved, we go for the endoscopy and the colonoscopy. We just go ahead with the next question from Dr. Yacha. Since we are talking about ultrasound, Dr. Yacha, the people are doing ultrasound, but they are not expert that much. Everybody gives his own report. And we are very much confused. There is a dilemma. So what to do? So we would like to have your comment on following things. Number one is the abdominal lymphadenopathy. They talk about this much size of the lymph node is there in there. Then they talk about the bowel wall thickening or not. And the third thing would like to have, what could be the minimum findings to diagnose abdominal tuberculosis, which is still very problematic thing. So sir, about the lymphadenopathy abdominal, your comments. Yeah.
Go to this slide. Next slide, please. Yes, press click. Okay. The ultrasound is generally being done by pediatricians for all functional abdominal pain. I mean to say recurrent abdominal pain of periumbilical region, which is not nocturnal, which you don't find any signs and symptoms other than abdominal pain. Now, ultrasound is done, and generally we see the reports where there are 2 points which is correctly mentioned in the slide, that you find lymph node size is 2 centimeter or 1.5 centimeter, and they say correlate clinically, or they find the ileal thickening. What we have to understand, very importantly, that the abdominal lymph nodes in the absence of any red flags do not carry much of meaning, number one. Number two, when you find the lymph nodes, always see, you have to see site of the lymph nodes. What is the site? Is it only mesenteric or somewhere else? What is the size? That is the only thing which is given to us, size. Is there caseation? Is there any mating of the lymph nodes, conglomeration, what we call calcification? What is their extent in the surrounding structures? What is there any encasement of the vessel? So all these are important parameters for whenever you see lymph nodes. Just size less than 2 doesn't mean anything if everything else is normal in the patient. So don't worry about that, and don't start investigating or treating for this tuberculosis. Now, what do you say here? I've shown a diagram, and any lymph nodes which are below the level of superior mesenteric artery, this is superior mesenteric artery origin. Below that, if you have lymph nodes, and they are not generally very, very significant, they are generally present in children, so you should not worry. And parents will always tell you, sir, there are lymph nodes. So you should say, if we have done ultrasound in 100 children, you'll find in 80% of the children, these lymph nodes are there. They are normal for this age, unless you have some abnormality. And lymph nodes above this origin of superior mesenteric artery are always abnormal. Always abnormal. Whether they are gastroduodenal, hepatic, celiac, splenic, wherever they are abnormal, or if they are in the retroperitoneum, they are abnormal irrespective of the size and characteristics. Now, regarding this tuberculosis, see, we know that abdominal tuberculosis is not diagnosed on a single finding. Abdominal tuberculosis, if you find the characteristics of the lymph nodes in abdominal tuberculosis, is there are lymph nodes which are having a central necrosis. Very, very important. That is how we differentiate. Lymph nodes may be present in many other conditions, but if there is a central necrosis, seen particularly on CT, that is pathognomonic of tuberculosis. So, or you have got the collection of lymph nodes together, they are large in size, and if you find calcification there, it may be of significance as far as tuberculosis is concerned. Just on lymph nodes alone, you can't make the diagnosis of abdominal tuberculosis. Simple, and there have been situations, 20% of celiac disease patients were, in our experience, treated with anti-tubercular therapy. And 20% of recurrent abdominal pain had received anti-tubercular therapy, which is not a correct practice at all. Just forget about the lymph node size unless it is large, more than 2 centimeters, and they are in the abnormal site, then you should consider it.
Okay, fine. Your message is that don't worry about abdominal lymphadenopathy until unless the size is more than 20 millimeter, right?
20 millimeters, or else you have got other features.
Right, abdominal. You know, Dr. Yacha.
Ileal thickening, you should not worry. Ileal thickening, they always say something here or there. That doesn't matter. And as a doctor, you have not to treat the test or an investigation. You have to see the child holistically, everything together, and then decide.
We have to also see the Mantoux test. We have to see the X-ray. But in children, we don't get the adhesions. We don't get the adhesions, you know, in the intestine. We don't get so much caseation in the early part of tuberculosis. So for diagnostic by USA is difficult. I think it is very difficult. Should we go for CT abdomen? Should we go for CT abdomen?
See, you need to have red flags for that. Yeah. Weight loss is there, fever is there, chest symptoms are there, family history is there, and then only, or there is intestinal obstruction is there, or there's a mass lesion which you are palpating of the abdominal examination, you are having blood in the stool which can be colitis-like symptoms. So those are the features of abdominal tip, or you have ascites. Then you have to worry about it. Then you have to investigate extensively these patients. Then you should do CT. Of course, CT is very important in them, but not in this recurrent abdominal pain, periumbilical, functional, nothing else is there. Don't worry about it at all.
Right. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Yacha, for your kind information. Friend, don't worry about abdominal lymphadenopathy unless it is clinically correlated and the
Correct.
size is more than 20 millimeter. Thank you.
Yes.
We go ahead with the next question from Dr. Rakesh Jora. Rakesh Jora sahab, there is mother talks about there is severe pain to my child. So what are non-pharmacological measures for pain, and what could be the pharmacotherapy in your opinion for a child who is at severe pain abdomen? Right.
Whenever we have diagnosed that the patient is suffering from the functional abdominal pain, our main, that is the main part of the treatment, is important component of the treatment is we should reassure the family, we should give education to the family and child, that we can educate, tell the family that is a non, although the pain is there, pain is real, but it is not so serious, there is no underlying cause, disorder is there, it usually alleviates with the time. Apart from this, if there is so much so that the patient, we should assure to the patient to avoid the reinforcement of the symptoms with the secondary gain. Another thing is, if child is missed the school or removed from the school due to the functional pain, we should try to get the child in the routine is day-to-day activities. Apart from this, another very important therapy that is in the initial part of the non-pharmacological therapy, that is the initial part of the treatment, that is the cognitive behavior therapy, that is the CBT therapy, that is which includes the psychoeducation, that is we can explain the prevalence and nature of RAP to the family, self-monitoring of the pain, that is in the initial part of treatment, self-monitoring that at what time pain is occur, what is the duration of pain, it is very important. Apart from the various coping skills training for the children, we can advise like that of deep breathing exercises, muscle relaxing exercises, guided imagery. So these non-pharmacological measures we can advise to the family as well child to cope up with the pain. And if there is, apart from this, it is a multidisciplinary approach. The drug therapies also comes in the play like that. If there is a functional dyspepsia is there, we can advise the acid suppressants. We can advise the antispasmodic treatment for the in the pharmacotherapy. And another very important thing is that is another second part of the question is that pharmacotherapy for the pain during acute phase, oral versus parenteral. It is not that it depends upon the condition of the patient. Mind you, that is it has been said that within the pediatric patient we are usually giving the analgesia in a very lower dosage. Because why it is so? Because we are thinking of that there can be chances of complications with the doses, or there can be masking of the physical diagnosis. But mind you, it has been said that whenever we are giving the appropriate doses, appropriate analgesic doses to the pediatric patients, we can have the good physical examination to make the diagnosis. And it has been also said that the opioid analgesics should be avoided, but and various randomized controls, as it has been said that for example, in case of appendicitis, there is chances of perforation abscess whenever you use the opioid analysis. But randomized control trials has said that there is no effect on there is no chances of the that is perforation as well as abscess.
So you are not advising any antispasmodic therapy to a child if he comes having the pain, whatever may be the reason.
I am advising, but I am saying that is we are suboptimally treating we are giving the analgesia suboptimally in these patients basically.
Right.
And regarding the parenteral, whenever there is we think that the gastrointestinal absorption of drug is not appropriate, like in cases of intestinal obstruction, paralytic ileus, in these cases we have to give the parenteral therapy for the relief of the pain. Like that parenteral therapy, we should try to give the intravenous, that is antispasmodic by the intravenous route. Try to avoid the intramuscular route, as in these cases there can be chances of nerve injury, vascular injury. But In case of severe acute pain, if the intravenous access is not there, we should try to do the intramuscular therapy. And in cases of whenever child can take orally, we can usually give the in non-urgent cases. We can usually to before making a diagnosis according to symptoms. We can give the treatment like that. If cases if we are thinking that
Would
patient
you
is
like to use dicyclomine, Dr. Jora? I'm
Yeah,
just
yes.
focusing. Would you like to give dicyclomine?
Yes, we can give the dicyclomine in the about 2 years. It is indicated. We can give the dicyclomine if the pain abdomen is there. But usually, if the patient come with the symptoms like that, patient is coming to us with functional dyspepsia. We try to be assess the percent. Patient is pain is due to we are thinking it is due to the constipation. We try to relieve that constipation. That is the thing which we are that is the primary diagnosis we are thinking even. Try to give these things first. Then, if the pain is not relieved, we can give the antispasmodics.
Okay, what's fine. Fine, Dr. Jora, you just want to say that we are giving antispasmodic like dicyclomine, but we are keeping in the mind that it can cause constipation. Yeah, this could be. Lalit, would you like to add something to this therapy?
Apart from antispasmodics, we can give that is in the dicyclomine. Nowadays, we are using the drotaverine in the pediatric patients. And apart from these, that is the
could be.
We can use that peppermint oil for that is IBS patient. We are using the peppermint oil and all these therapy. But main therapy in the functional pain is try to assure and basically our goal of the treatment to minimize the pain and to have the optimum function for the patient.
Dr. Lalit, would you like to add something?
I think yes, rightly said. We know the evidence suggests the use of cognitive behavioral therapy, but for acute relief, one has to resort to analgesics. If it is midgut origin periumbilical, then definitely dicyclomine or hyoscine or drotaverine, they should be used in the optimum doses so that the child is pain-free in acute phase. And then once the child is pain-free, then you can begin with the counseling and the subsequent pain management for the long term.
Okay, fine. So the parenteral, you would not like to give parenteral therapy until it is very severe, and that should be given IV. So what could be the IV therapy for a severe pain abdomen if you want to give parenteral therapy? Dr. Lalit, would you advise?
Yeah, so if it is a colicky pain and parenteral hyoscine can be very well used. It has very good result. It has no, addiction potential. So it has to be used only once. It cannot be used for SOS. Someone who is coming again and again, then definitely our maintenance therapy has to be optimized rather than using SOS analgesics.
Fine. So yeah, friends, we would like to use antispasmodic, keeping in the mind that the patient can have the constipation with it. And we have to assure the patient that analgesia is not effective. Ultimately, you have to do the counseling for the reassurance. Now, next question from Dr. Lalit Baradia. What could be the long-term choice for pharmacotherapy, in your opinion?
Yeah, so if you look at the classical functional abdominal pain, the mainstay of the long-term therapy is basically cognitive behavioral therapy. Someone has very rightly said, you need medication till your advice works. So how effectively you have counseled will decide how long the child is going to need medication. So in terms of long-term medication for pharmacotherapy, the pharmacotherapy which acts centrally have found to be better than those which act peripherally. In the short term, we use drugs which act peripherally. For the long term, we use drugs which act centrally. Though if you look at the evidence in children is much weaker than the evidence in adult. Now, what are the options? In the long-term therapy, the classical is the first line antidepressant, which is tricyclic antidepressant. And now the latest is the second line newer generation antidepressant, which are basically selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Now among the first line, the most common is the amitriptyline, which is generally given at the bedtime. It does have some side effect in the form of increased sleep, constipation. So generally it is given at the bedtime. And this newer generation is serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Among them are fluoxetine, citalopram. They can cause sleep disturbances. So they are preferred to be given in the morning. Both of them are reasonably well safe. I do use them, but not in every case. Sometime where I am not comfortable using them, I take help of our psychologist, where their psychotherapy works. And sometime I will have to take help of even psychiatrist. Dr. Yacha will tell about what are the precise indication. But these are the medications.
Later on, we will go on that subject, right?
Yeah, so these are the medications I may have to use for a few weeks to months. Apart from that, nutraceuticals, there is a lot of emerging data on use of probiotic. Though again, only for select indication, like for irritable bowel syndrome, there is some role of a specific probiotic called VSL3. It is a combination of 8 different strains. For functional abdominal pain, there is some evidence for usage of Lactobacillus reuteri, where it is a 4-week trial has been found to be useful. The data on probiotics is emerging, has not been the standard of therapy, but somewhere where we are not comfortable using the centrally acting pain, relievers, or the, those which reduce the threshold of the pain, one can use probiotics as the treatment, as they are devoid of any side effect.
Yeah. Dr. Yacha, I would like to have your opinion. What about these pharmacotherapy measures, especially the probiotic, and what the Cochrane literature talks about? Yeah.
Yes.
Your opinion.
See, I mentioned in the etiopathogenesis that mostly it is the central drugs, CNS drugs, which have to work actually for this. And the peripheral drugs are not really useful, although Dr. Lalit mentioned that there may be probiotics, they may be useful. VSL3, no. For IBS, yes. For this lactobacillus GG has been tried, but there is no conclusive evidence for lactobacillus GG to have an effect on functional abdominal pain. So that is the thing, is basically the counseling, reassurance to find out the stressors which might be operating in that particular child. And that is very important. And maybe in certain situations, you have to give these drugs which Dr. Lalit mentioned, centrally acting drugs, antidepressants. Very, very rarely.
Yeah. So no, Cochrane, I was just seeing that Cochrane literature says that we have got mild to moderate evidence to support this use of probiotics in chronic pain abdomen. To how much extent, they can't say it. It is $1 million industry. It's everything,
If you ask me, ever since I have moved to Bangalore, I see a lot of cases of recurrent abdominal pain. GI is more than liver. And I am forced or compelled to write something like lactobacillus GG in there. And whether it works or not works, but I do give, in certain cases, I do give lactobacillus GG.
Would you like
we have
to
nothing
use?
else to offer.
VSL3 is not available.
Would you like to use fiber diet?
No, lactobacillus GG is available from a company which is well known to you. Cipla is selling that. Unibiotics. Yes, there are different forms. LGG, but I'm not saying that I'm not a proponent of these probiotics, but you are compelled to use it. You are compelled to use in certain situations.
Okay, well, just go ahead. We have shortage of time. Yes, Lalit, what would you like to
Yeah. So regarding the recent Cochrane 2021, where they have shown that the amitriptyline, tricyclic antidepressant, versus placebo, the effects are same when used for chronic abdominal pain. So this is the latest.
Right.
Okay.
VSL3 is available in India or not?
It is available.
Available.
So which is better,
about the fiber diet? Fiber diet.
Noro.
Dr. Lalit. Noro, fiber diet. Yeah.
Earlier, the irritable bowel syndrome fiber was the standard therapy, but nowadays the recent literature doesn't say. But those in whom the diet is low in fiber, one can definitely recommend as a type of as a message to healthy diet, that the diet should contain good amount of fiber, but not that diet is going to be used as a medicine.
No role of fiber. Okay, Cochrane literature also refuses for that.
Fiber,
just go ahead. Yeah. Now we go ahead with the important topic of today, with the counseling part left to Dr. S.K. Yacha. Sir, how you do counsel?
I'm not telling you the book style. I will tell you what has been my experience in counseling for last almost 35 years. And I found it a good actually method of counseling. So first of all, In isolation, I'm talking of functional abdominal pain, which is confined only to the periumbilical area. There is no sign, no other symptom, there are no red flags, everything else is normal. So how do I counsel this kind of a patient? So I will say to the parents that you have come with a problem, the pain is real, what Dr. Jora also said, you must give a positive diagnosis. Don't say there is nothing. Say, yes, there is a problem and this pain is genuine and real. But your child sleeps very well during the night. He or she develops this problem during the daytime. Second thing, what I tell, in the age group of children from 4 to 14 years of age, almost 30% children in the world have this kind of a problem. So you are not alone. There are many children who have this kind of problem. But we need to focus on one point to them, that this pain is not dangerous, It is not going to progress and produce an adversity on your child. So that is another thing. Fourth point, what I say, that maybe over the period of time, this will be over. This is fourth point. Now, why? Then the question comes from them. Why does this pain occur? So has been my explanation previously, what I tell them, see, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, whole of this system is in a movement. It is like a worm-like movement. Propulsion takes place for the items which are in the gut. And this is around, in small intestine, it's around 3 to 4 per minute. And what happens in your child? I give them example. In your child, maybe that instead of 4, there are 8 or 10 or 12 movements per minute. And that is the time when they develop this pain abdomen. And there is visceral hypersensitivity. How do I explain? I tell them, if I pinch you on your hand, some people will feel pain immediately on pinching with light pinch, and some people will feel pain with the deep pinch. And your child has a lower threshold for the pinch. That is what is in the brain. So therefore, whatever little pain, what is the trigger there, is perceived very early by your child, and that is why he is having or she is having this kind of abdominal pain. So don't worry about it. It will go over after some time. But then the question comes from them. What do we do, sir, doctor, when he gets pain? Then we have to tell them what Dr. Lalit also said and Dr. Jora also said. The other important thing, what you need to say them, you have to explore these stressors. How do you explore? I've been making the parents to go out first from the counseling room and keep the child, if he's older, ask him questions, any problem you are facing in coaching, in schooling, your friends, indirectly, how is your school, how is your teacher? They will come out with some reasons there. Or they may say everything is okay. Then you call in the parents and make the child to go out. And parents, you ask, don't please give too much of attention to the pain. This child will going to seek a lot of attention from you, and you should not worry about you have to have a distraction, attention distraction, as if you have not heard. So therefore, your child will become better with that way. And don't inform your relatives, friends, my child is not doing well, and don't go from doctor to doctor. There is no point in investigating further on your child. That it gives a lot of reassurance to them. And maybe second counseling will make it perfect. And some of the children will still come with pain abdomen. Those are the situations where we may have to give the pharmacotherapy.
Right, Dr. Yacha, thank you very much. This is an art which one has to learn. And very rightly said, the reassurance and giving time to the parents for counseling is very necessary. Now we go to the next question from Dr. Yacha. So, sir, there are some importance of keeping the pain diary, the diet modification, and family history of GI symptoms. How much attention you would like to give to these things? Yeah.
The first one is pain diary. I would not like to have pain diary. I will
Fine.
not like that because the reason is you are giving a lot of importance that way to pain. And mother will be always insisting the child, tell me, do you have pain? Do you have pain? Do you have pain? Father will tell, do you have pain? So what will happen? It will become a vicious cycle. Therefore, we want them to forget about this pain, not give less attention to this pain. Therefore, maintaining a pain diary is of no benefit to my mind. I don't know what other panelists
Swami,
will
okay,
say,
fine,
but
fine.
I never ask.
That's
I
very
never
right.
ask.
Yeah.
Second thing is diet modification. Diet modification, see, recently now things are changing very, very aggressively. In IBD also, in many of the GI disorders, it is the microbiome which is making a big difference. That is, some of these children, it is not that easy. Some of these children will also have associated dyspepsia. Some children will have vomiting. Some children will have nausea. Some people will have bloating. All these things are coming. But I think overall, in diet, we should we should always ascertain is any food that is causing the problem in the child. As I mentioned, in etiopathogenesis, what is the trigger? Maybe food. So what are the foods? Mostly you should give the allergic foods, allergens like peanuts, like your cold drinks, your these protein supplements, the soya feeds, seafood, chocolates. They are all causing problems in the GI tract. And in fact, they are now as a causative agent for IBD even in adults and children. So therefore, I would say that thing, unless you have some flatulence and other things, you may use FODMAS. FODMAS is actually the fermenting oligosaccharides, monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polyols. And they actually cause this modification can be done. But I don't think we should go deep into that. We should only make modifications of chocolates, seafoods, mushrooms, soya, and peanuts. These are generally the causative agents of food allergy in children. Maybe they are causing some kind of giving a trial. You don't know. You can only give a trial.
We should also
So
avoid the
regarding
junk food. Yeah. About the junk
yes,
food.
yes, junk food has to be in all the cases. Always say first thing to child, whether it's a asthma case, tell don't eat junk food. Say no to that. That is very important. I have seen a lot of children taking kurkure, uncle chips, getting esophagitis, which is well established on endoscopy. So bad. So therefore, junk foods have to be avoided at any cost.
Family history of GI symptoms. Family
history of GI symptoms is important because some of the children will have the family history. Maybe around 10 to 15% of these cases who have got these functional disorders, GI disorders, have also the family history. Mother or father has got IBS, has got flatulence, has got dyspepsia. These children do have this kind of problem as well, or migraine, in fact. So you should talk about the abdominal migraine maybe some other time, which is a rare disease, but it does occur.
So how does this abdominal migraine presents? Have you seen ever case?
Abdominal migraine is severe midline pain. Severe midline pain stereotype. Like cyclical vomiting will come in maybe intervals of months, weeks. That is what is called the abdominal migraine. And it is uncommon, but it is often there. But it's not where you have to do EEGs and other things, they are not required. It's a clinical diagnosis which you can make in these children. And
how do you diagnose then? How do you diagnose without doing EEG?
Clinical assessment.
Clinical diagnosis.
Severe pain in the absence of any organic disease, which is paroxysmal, in between it comes, in between the patient is completely all right. It's a midline pain. That's very important.
Right. What you would like to give then? What is the therapy?
Same therapy as we have mentioned about the recurrent abdominal pain. Same therapy is also tried in these patients.
Would you like to use propranolol?
No. That has no role in that.
No role. Okay. Now, one word about that. Would you like to have consultation from psychologists and psychiatrists? Because parents very badly react to that. Yeah.
It is a very big question. In the West, psychologists, psychiatrists, yes, you take a lot of help from them. They give good advice. And in these patients, actually, they are required because what Dr. Lalit mentioned, that we have two kinds of therapies, cognitive therapy and hypnotherapy. They have been found to be very good. And nowadays, you have hypnotherapy which is available, a virtual model are available. You can do self hypnotherapy. Those models we have to explore. So that can be used. But I never found, honestly speaking, so far, I have sent maybe 5 or 10 cases of in my lifetime to a psychiatrist or a psychologist kindly assess these patients, and the patients return. They said that no, sir, you only treat us. We are unhappy. I don't know. I may be wrong. But in the present era, now the problems, psychiatric problems are increasing, depressions are increasing. And we need skillful, very good psychiatrists who can address pediatric problems particularly. That is required. I think that should be, we should propagate the pediatric psychologist or pediatric psychiatrist for this.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so we don't need practically much of advice from them, in your opinion, but the behavior cognitive therapy is an important for which we can consult the psychiatrist if needed. So, yeah.
Right.
The patient who does not respond to...
I may be wrong. You can ask the other panelists if they send and what is the output from them.
Okay.
You can ask them. Dr. Gupta is there, Lalit is there, Dora is there.
Yeah, I would like to say my experience that I have found them very, very useful, especially the psychologists, because in many cases I really feel there is no need of medication, and a counseling by psychologists brings out a lot of salient features which the parents find very useful, and those are modifiable. So I think I find psychologists very useful, and in occasional cases a psychiatrist, but psychologist is something. But only thing is that not all of us can have an access to a child psychologist.
Okay. For behavior therapy, you would prefer psychologist. Next
Absolutely.
question. Yeah.
Yes,
Pediatric gastroenterologist and pediatric surgeon. So, see, pediatric gastro के लिए कब refer करना sir? Dr. Yacha.
I went 2, 3, 4 times. They have been seen by my other colleagues, pediatrician colleagues. Then either they will send or they will come on their own.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't find that we add anything big in that except in good counseling and precision in making the diagnosis, pediatric gastroenterologist. Pediatric surgeon doesn't do anything. He has no role in this.
I think
मैं तो सर जब भी फोन करता हूँ मालूम पड़ता ललित एंडोस्कोपी कर रहा है. मतलब ये लोग क्या है कि जब भी फोन करते हैं मालूम पड़ता साहब जोरा साहब में चाहे ललित जी वो एंडोस्कोपी कर रहे हैं, तो फिर उनको तो भेजना ही पड़ेगा. वो कहेंगे यार पेन एब्डोमेन ठीक नहीं होता, आपसे वॉमिटिंग हो रही है, भैया भेजो.
I would say when the pain of the child becomes pain of the doctor, send it to us.
Yeah, fine. This is right, sir. Yeah, very good guidance. The pain of the patient becomes pain of the doctor. Fine. Right word. Now the one question, one case presentation from Dr. Yacha. Sir, I would allow only one case because we could have some question. Lalit?
Yeah. There are a lot of questions, sir. You need to see the chat box.
So I have around 10 questions in the chat box.
These cases I brought to see that you don't miss the red flags. They just recurrent severe periumbilical abdomen for last 5 years. Routine and repeated work abnormal, including CT has been done. Treated as functional abdominal pain. History of 3 seizures in the past on antiepileptics overlooked by the residents. Brought to emergency in post-seizure encephalopathy, blood pressure very high. We as pediatricians you know that blood pressure is an integral part of examination. Knit the features together, that pain abdomen, seizures, and also there is a high blood pressure. This can be a case of porphyria. Then this proved to be a case of porphyria. That's all.
Yes, sir.
Chairman has allowed only one case. Recurrent abdominal pain for 2 months, waking up at night, urinate twice, pre-board examinations, academic stress, studying more than eating, clothes loose, weight not checked, no contact with tuberculosis, and emergency. Just go back.
Yeah, fine, fine.
Emergency random blood sugar is 455. Diabetic ketoacidosis.
Very good.
Labeled as functional abdominal pain and dogmatic dictate from the doctor. This is a 9-year-old child who has got abdominal pain for 6 years, onset at 3 years. 3 years, we don't see recurrent abdominal pain. We don't see functional abdominal pain. Treated as functional pain, gases, abdominal distension, overlooked by physician. And when the search was made for this organic cause, there was what is called the malrotation of the gut with small bowel volvulus, surgery done and child became. So we should not miss these. These are red flags. Next. So less than 3 years, we should not diagnose. 4 years, we should not diagnose functional abdominal pain. Recurrent periumbilical abdominal pain for 3 years, not till awakening. Weight is low, again a red flag. Height is normal. Ultrasound done elsewhere reported to be normal. Main pancreatic duct was 4 millimeters in body, dilated, and this patient had actually, you can see in the second diagram, there's a pancreas division. There are 2 on the CT, you can see 2 ducts are there. This patient had sphincterotomy was done and patient became asymptomatic. So we should not miss these red flags.
Very good,
Only cases who have got isolated periumbilical abdominal pain of chronic duration without any other signs and symptoms, they are the real cases of functional abdominal pain. There may be here and there pulmonary, but no red flags should be there. We should make a thorough examination.
This is a message to the people, our listeners, that diabetic ketoacidosis, porphyrias, and chronic pancreatitis could also be an important reason for the chronic pain abdomen when a lot of workup has to be done. So thank you very much, sir. And I just read the summary of the messages just for a minute, then we can go for some questions. Thank you very much for all panelists. The chronic pain abdomen is a common problem in 10 to 15% school-going children. Most cases of chronic pain abdomen in children are functional abdominal pains, FCAP. FCAP is caused by central-driven stress-induced spasmodic intestinal contractions and heightened visceral hypersensitivity. Complete clinical examination looking diligently for red flag signs is very essential. A structured set of investigation is advised in level 1 for all CAPs, level 2 for CAPs and for red flag signs, and level 3 for problematic and difficult cases. In level 2 cases, we have ultrasonography, we have got the upper GI endoscopy and the colonoscopy. And for red flag signs and for level 3 problematic patient difficult cases, we have to investigate like porphyrias and diabetic ketoacidosis, as Dr. Yacha has already mentioned. Various non-pharmacological and pharmacological agents should be used judiciously in acute severe pain conditions with reassurance. Few cases of conversion reaction, anxiety, depression, and poor response to conservative therapy may need help from psychologists and psychiatrists for cognitive behavioral therapy. Hospitalization in such cases should always be avoided. Prognosis is good since 70% of children outgrow their pain in 6 to 8 weeks time after diagnosis, while 30% may have functional pain in their adulthood.
Correct.
Parental counsel plays a vital role in the management, as Dr. Yacha has very well explained it, and lifestyle management like regular healthy eating habits and toilet habits is key to the success, which must be addressed upon to the children. Thank you very much, sir. And for a vote of thanks and then letter of some questions. Questions, we should take a Lalit.
Yeah, sir. I think we can take questions, and at the end, I will propose vote of thanks. You would like to take, yeah, please.
Yeah, chat box, yeah.
आप बोलोगे या should I take?
आप ले लीजिए, चालू करें.
अच्छा, ठीक है. So we have. So the first question is that, is it true that the pain around umbilicus is mostly functional? Yacha sir.
Yes, it is true. Most of them, see, these pain abdomen, periumbilical, most of them are functional abdominal pain. And you should always ask the child to show with one finger after lifting the t-shirt or shirt. They should show with one. They will show you in the periumbilical region. That is the key. That here it is the pain. That is functional abdominal pain. Very rarely you may find the organic cause.
So Dr. Mahesh Sharma from Bikaner has asked to simplify Rome criteria and also which is the best probiotic for recurrent pain abdomen.
Anybody else? Should I answer?
Yeah, so for Rome criteria, I think I have elaborated. Rome criteria are basically, we need to look into the criteria laid down for different functional GI disorder, and depending upon the case, we have to try to apply them and give them a positive diagnosis. It is very difficult to remember. We have to have the reference ready to us, and this the reference is available on net now freely, and one can keep that copy accessible to us. As far as probiotic, I think sir has already mentioned for irritable bowel syndrome, VSL3, for functional abdominal pain, some evidence of Lactobacillus reuteri, some evidence of Lactobacillus GG, and in others like infantile colic, Lactobacillus reuteri, and in others, all others, it is I think still an experimental phase. Coming to the next question.
Dr. Yacha, would you agree with gluteri, the Lactobacillus gluteri? What do you find? Is it useful?
See, regarding probiotic, we must say one thing very clearly, that nothing is proven. They are only anecdotal evidence, but not conclusive evidences that we should, we may try in certain cases, but not otherwise.
Lalit, go ahead.
Yeah, so the next question from Dr. Ajay to Dr. Johra, how can we suspect worm infestation as a cause of CAP? Do giving a anti-helminthic for a child with chronic abdominal pain is a justified practice?
Suspect how it is a practice, as you said, it is usually whenever any patient to us with the pain abdominal comes, we usually give the anti-helminthic. When I was doing the MD, well, it is not nowadays like that. Sometime ascaris is coming out of nose and mouth. These things has been tremendously decreased over the years. But whenever a patient comes, at least we should give one course of anti-helminthic.
Yeah, so another question from Dr. Subhamoy Das, that severe pain abdomen, we have to rule out anterior cutaneous nerve entrapment or myofascial pain syndrome if other organic causes are ruled out. I think this is a very good point. Is pointed out that sometimes the pain can be originating from the abdominal wall. It is more of a somatic pain, and we try to investigate it inside the abdomen. So we have to first differentiate between a somatic and a visceral pain. And if it is a somatic pain, it comes out of the ambit of functional abdominal pain and has to be evaluated accordingly. Very good point, Dr. Subhamoy. So yeah, so the next question is role of fast food. I think Dr. Yacha has said it should be minimized as far as possible.
No, please stop it. It is creating havoc all over the country. Please stop it.
Yeah, so Dr. Babu from PGI.
The doctor should become example. When they have parties, they eat Coca-Cola and all this cold drinks. They eat noodles. They should become example. Like the Western people, when there's a celiac disease meeting or symposia, big ones, international, you have to take to lunches which are gluten-free.
So Dr. Babu from PGI has asked, can we use pentazocine for pain abdomen? Now this belongs to opioid group and has side effects in the form of constipation, sphincter of Oddi dysfunction. So if it is a functional abdominal pain, I think we should get, we should avoid opioid. But if it is an organic pain, sometime if it is very severe, one can definitely resort to opioid. But I understand that this is not easily available to most of the hospital, and you need a specific license to really store them and use them for emergency.
We can use tramadol also. Nowadays, they are using tramadol in the pediatric age group patients.
Yeah, so one can resort to tramadol, which is, I think, well approved and has less side effect. Again, from Dr. Subhamoy Das, is the term functional abdominal pain syndrome is valid anymore? As I understand, the Rome 4 criteria has put functional pain abdomen not otherwise specified in place of functional abdominal pain syndrome, which are there in the Rome 3. So I think the current terminology is functional abdominal pain, not otherwise specified, where they are not fitting into the other functional abdominal pain, well-defined functional abdominal pain entities.
Go ahead.
Dr. Chaudhary has asked how to counsel parents for continuing PPI or acid suppressant for peri-umbilical pain, that is functional abdominal pain, and they are stressing for repeated abdominal ultrasound every 2 to 3 months. So they come from Dr. Yacha sir, हाँ वो बोलेंगे कि हमें तो अल्ट्रासाउंड करा दो बिकॉज पहले लिम्फ नोड आए थे, पहले 9 मिलीमीटर के।
अल्ट्रासाउंड अगर करना भी है तो करो, एक बार मगर 2-3 बार नहीं करना है for satisfaction, because we should not go for fishing expedition. This is the word. Fishing expedition should not be, and we should not chase. We should try stoppage of search of these disorders for functional abdominal pain. So वो कहते हैं तो उनको कहना, आपको समझाना है, your job to explain to them there's no role. If we do it 100 children, we'll find in 80% that there's a lymph node. It is not going to do any result.
Fine, sir. Yeah.
सर एक और बात, ये तो continuing PPI or acid suppression for peri-umbilical pain. So how?
No, not at all. That is the dyspeptic pain. That is upper abdominal pain. That's a different group of the patient.
But sir, we do find
They have,
many
they have got early society. They have got pain after the feeding. They may get up in the morning. They may get up during the night. That's a different ball game.
But we do often see children with very umbilical pain. They will work, any placebo will work, and you do PPI, they work, and it is become very difficult for them to stop.
What PPIs have, although I would not say that there is a severe the side effects, but why should we expose them to PPIs unnecessarily?
And the role of digestive enzymes, sir?
Pardon?
Role of digestive enzymes preparations which we are giving.
वो आपके हाथ में है. What do you prefer? I prefer to give sometimes placebo folic acid, which is harmless at all. And you have to write, because I have now learned in the private sector, you have to write some medicine for them, which can be harmless, but your counseling has a greater impact. I could attract a lot of patients to my side because of good counseling.
And some even prescribe folic acid sharp at 7 p.m. If you precisely give a time, they also, that is more benefit.
that is fine.
Manish, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Sir, one question to the moderator, Dr. Das Gupta ji. Dr. Pooja has asked, in which cases lactobacillus GG would be helpful? अभी तक सवाल पूछे, आप जवाब दो.
नहीं पूछे तो आप डॉक्टर याचा साहब बैठे हैं ना, डॉक्टर साहब जवाब दीजिए. जी
मैं तो थक गया बोल के. देखो, probiotics, don't go with the notion that probiotics are the treatment for recurrent abdominal pain or functional abdominal pain.
CP Das Gupta ji, आपका विचार क्या है?
Go with the notion. Only few trials are there which are not conclusive and not proven by others.
Exactly.
To say that lactobacillus GG works. It does not. It is not necessary.
This is $1 million industry, and they keep on advising even in autism. Okay, otherwise you can use probiotics in autism also. So I don't agree with that. Many more studies are needed before confirming. I would not advise probiotics. Yeah.
So Dr. Pooja has again asked the role of low FODMAP diet in IBS. I would like to take that. Now this FODMAP concept is an Australian concept where it has found to be useful. Again, it has not been validated in our part. But we have to remember that the moment we tell this FODMAP concept to the parents, the educated parents, they search net and then they put the child on a significant restrictive diet, which may again not be very, useful for the child. The more the child of a functional abdominal pain, especially, is put on restrictive diet, more it, defies the purpose of, counseling that this is something not harmful. Of course, in select IBS patient, I generally recommend is to avoid, maybe reduce milk, not to avoid totally, reduce dairy, and avoid onion and garlic, which are very simple to avoid, rather than giving the long list of, wheat and so many things to avoid, which becomes very difficult. So, of course, it does help in some of the cases. Yeah. Sir, would you like to add low FODMAP? I think Dr. Yacha has already said that. Yeah. So Dr. Gautam has asked, is mesenteric adenitis a common cause of abdominal pain and does it mimic appendicitis? Dr. Yacha sir. Mesenteric adenitis.
Mesenteric adenitis is a well-established entity. It does occur. It is quite common in children. It may mimic acute appendicitis. Yes, you have to rule it out. You have to rule out acute appendicitis or any kind of acute abdomen in such kind of cases, unless you are convinced that no such catastrophe is there on examination in this child.
So Yacha sir, whether your approach will be different if the radiologists say mesenteric lymphadenopathy versus mesenteric lymphadenitis, whether the approach will be different?
How will they diagnose lymphadenitis?
They might say some inflammation, some surrounding fluid.
Lymphadenopathy? No, not really. Not really.
Not that an adenitis would just.
Mesenteric adenitis. Basically, you have to see that there is no appendicitis, there is no intersusception, there is no volvulus. Mesenteric adenitis is a small thing when diagnosed. Others are dangerous. That is, we have to exclude those dangerous situations. Mesenteric adenitis you can treat, there is no problem.
I think Yacha sir ka signal lost ho raha hai. Haan, theek hai. Okay, so Dr. Neeraj has asked Dr. Jora sir, best anti-helminthic in obstruction by worms.
Best anti-helminthic, albendazole is the best anti-helminthic till now. You can use albendazole.
Dr. Jora sir?
Yeah.
I think Lalit, we can bind up. Time is more than what we were expecting.
Dr. Lalit, albendazole, which we are regularly using basically. Albendazole, or we can use the mebendazole.
I think Dr. Yacha, can we just conclude the session? Yeah.
Yes. Please do.
I think
please do.
you can keep on talking, but it's not. Time is already moved so much. So I request Dr. Thank you all panelists with my heart, deep of my heart. I just convey you. Thank you very much, everybody, for nice discussion, especially Dr. Yacha, Dr. Lalit, and Dr. Jora. And I vote of thanks के लिए मैं Dr. Lalit से request करूँगा कि एक vote of thanks दे दें एक बार Dr. Lalit. Dr. Lalit.
Unmute yourself.
Unmute.
Okay, sir, एक last question आया for Dr. Yacha. Can abdominal pain be the only sign of celiac disease?
This is very important question, sir.
Yeah. You people are in the celiac disease belt. And just now, they said, yes, this is one condition where this 4 times increase presentation with abdominal pain. So you should do it. Why not? If it is persistent and you are convinced that there's a, particularly if there's a growth failure, anemia, or some subtle signs are there, or there is family history, you should certainly do it. I would request you people to actually do a prospective study on that.
Sir,
Okay.
I would like to add that considering the high prevalence and link with the chronic pain abdomen, as such in Rajasthan, we all have added TTG as the first line investigation in a case of chronic pain abdomen.
Correct.
I have mentioned this in my.
Yes, sir.
So I think with this, I am highly thankful to Dr. Yacha sir for sparing time for us. We have really enriched by this today's session. I would also like to thank Dr. Dasgupta sir for excellent moderation, Dr. Jora sir for sparing your time and your experience, Dr. R.K. Gupta for a brilliant start, and all the audience for a very interactive participation. I wish we had some more time because I can see some more questions coming in, but every good thing has to end sometime. With this, with last but not the least, I would like to thank the CIPLA team, especially the Krishna and Sadli, who have arranged Zoom platform for us for helping us spread this scientific knowledge. And with this, I say goodbye to you. Good night, all of you. See you next month.
Right.
Thank you.
Namaskar. Thank you.
very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Yacha ji.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good night, sir. Good night. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Namaskar.